Members, supporters, friends of Save Venice, I am Christopher Apostle, the director of the Projects Committee of Save Venice, and I'd like to welcome you today to one of a series of talks hosted by us, by Save Venice, and this one is specifically today for donors and members because your support lets us do what we can do. And so this is our special thank you, or one of our special thank yous to our donors and supporters. I hope that many of you have been able to join us over the past few months as we've done these talks. And for those of you who are maybe new or haven't joined us before, you're in really for a big treat today. Now, obviously, our webinars have covered a number of subjects about Venice and its lagoon, its art, architecture, and the special challenges that this city, unique in the world, has had and is facing in the new century. And indeed, these historical challenges are really the focus of our discussion today. Save Venice looks to 50 historic restorations for 2021. We'll look at half a century of our commitment to Venice and its cultural heritage. To give you all quick context for our talk, in November of 1966, northern Italy suffered a series of historic floods that threatened some of the world's greatest patrimony. This was felt very acutely in the city of Venice itself. There was an acqua alta, a high water of over 194 centimeters. Just to give you an idea, that's taller than I am. That's sort of basketball player size. And that was the start of a real effort by a group of concerned art historians, connoisseurs, who banded together in response to this disaster to form a group which would in 1971 become Save Venice. Over the past 5 decades, Save Venice has partnered with local and international art historians, art connoisseurs, conservators, scholars to preserve and protect Venice's artistic patrimony. Our mission has been to become Our mission has only become more imperative after the historic flooding last November, second in severity only to the disaster in 1966. Today, we're lucky to have with us today my colleague, Melissa Conn, the director of the Venice office for Save Venice. If there's an eyewitness to the history of Save Venice, I think it's no exaggeration to say that she certainly is one, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that you have Venice in your blood. You've been living in Venice for many years now, and she joined the organization in 1989 when webinars like this were not possible. I think all you had was one phone line and a fax machine, probably. Now she's overseeing over 40 projects in and around the lagoon of all types, with a budget of over $4 million. She's currently actively overseeing, among many, many other projects, 2 of our major 50th anniversary projects, the restoration at the Basilica of Santa Maria Assunta in Torcello. That's the real cradle of Venice itself. And in the Scuola Italiana in the Venetian Ghetto, the Italian Synagogue. In fact, we're very lucky to get Melissa to pause for a few moments to give us this talk. And of course, at 11 p.m. or past 11 p.m. now, looking very fresh, I have to say, Melissa. So she'll give us a little talk on some of these amazing projects. After Melissa's talk, we will be taking some questions and we'll allow a little time for question and answer. You will see a function somewhere on your screen that allows you to send us questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. But without further ado, Melissa, thank you so much, and take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm very happy to be with you this evening. I'm sorry that I'm not in the States now, but it's great to be able to bring Venice to you. So I'll start talking about Save Venice Looks at 50 and a little bit of the history of our organization, and then talk about our anniversary projects. So of course, as Christopher mentioned, the big catalyst for all the international private committees in Venice were the 1966 flood. That brought the world's attention to the fragile nature of the artistic patrimony here. And it also inspired groups of art historians, musicians, visitors to come together and raise funds for Venice. So Save Venice comes out of this initiative. And it was already the summer of 1967 when a group of Americans led by John McAndrew who joined International Fund for Monuments with the Venice Committee, deciding that they were going to raise money specifically for for flood relief. And the story is that John McAndrews was traveling down the Grand Canal and past Cadoro, the palace, and noticed that the scaffolding was coming down, but the restoration had not been completed. And he found out they'd run out of funds. And so this inspired him to raise money for Cadoro, and then continue working for the safeguarding of Venice. By 1971, John McAndrew and his associates decided to form Save Venice. And so Save Venice was incorporated in Boston in 1971 after a difference of opinion and way of working from International Funds for Monuments. And so that's why we celebrate our anniversary in 2021, but actually our roots are a little bit older. So the founding members were Sidney Friedberg and also Betty McAndrew, who's John's wife. And the liaison in Venice for many, many years was Marisa Louisa Rampin Weston, who had married an Englishman during the Second World War. And so she had the English last name, but she was a Venetian. So she helped the McAndrews to organize the projects in Venice. And they were soon joined by Roland Hadley, who had been who was the director of the Gardner Museum at that time. And so the first projects began under the Save Venice name. And the largest one was the Church of San Donato in Murano. And our old newsletters talk about this being the largest project that was undertaken by a private or public institution after the floods. It was a project that was funded by a single donor, Jean and Gladys Delmas, and was a very important and momentous time for Save Venice. Another important project from 1976 to 1981 was the Levantine Synagogue, the Synagoga Levantina, which received its heating system for the first time, the first heated synagogue in the ghetto, and the ghetto synagogue that is used during the winter because of the heating system originally supplied by Save Venice. Another extremely important project for the founders of Save Venice was Torcello. They joined many other committees to form the International Torcello Committee and worked to restore the mosaics, both all walls, and also to work on the roof and the actual brickwork. John McAndrews died in February of 1978. He died in Venice and was buried in Venice, where his grave is still there, also his wife, Betty, who died in 1986. It's very touching on John McAndrew's tombstone, which says, Venezia benedetta, non ti voglio più lasciar, meaning, dear blessed Venice, I don't ever want to leave you. So John McAndrew certainly left a legacy and an inspiration to everyone at Save Venice. When he died, the donations made in his honor were all dedicated to the project at Torcello. And posthumously was published his book, Venetian Architecture in the Early Renaissance. As time went by, there were changes in Save Venice, and by the 80s, we had a new group of very interested and dedicated board members. Roland Hadley was still on the board. He'd been part of the original crew with McAndrews, but they were soon joined by Larry Lovett in 1982, and then by Bob Guthrie in 1985. And here we see a photograph from our 1986 newsletter, where you see Bob and Larry and Bump Hadley, along with Terry Stanfill, who was one of the members of Save Venice on the board back in 1971, and she's still a member today of the board of directors. And then Hetty Allen and Lily Auchincloss. So at this point, Save Venice shifts from Boston to New York because that's where the officers live. And Save Venice decides to adopt the Church of Santa Maria dei Miracoli. So this is a large project, would take 10 years, and really changed the way Save Venice worked. We also opened their first office in Venice in 1987. Before Mrs. Weston had run Save Venice out of her home on the Lido, and it was decided that we needed a stronger presence in Venice, and we had the office on the Grand Canal from 1987 to 2015 in the San Marco district. And B and Bob Guthrie were very instrumental in sort of establishing the office and creating an important presence in Venice, just as the McAndrews had. Another important initiative were the Regatta Week Galas. And here we see some press from the first Regatta Week Gala in 1987, and then a collage from the 1989 gala. This was a wonderful way to raise funds. It's a practice that Save Venice still uses today, but Save Venice was really the first to go ahead and have an event and invite 100, 200 people to come to Venice to participate in lectures and concerts, cultural events, and a great ball on the Grand Canal. So for the funding from the Regatta Week Galas, always the first years went to the Church of the Miracoli, and that work was completed in 1998. Then the next generation coming along of chairmen decided to dedicate their efforts to the Church of San Sebastiano, and that's an ongoing project. We're still slowly winding that one up. I have a few more, maybe another year or two before we're completed. But that was under the leadership of Bob Lovejoy, Matthew White, and Frederick Ilchman, our current chairman. San Sebastiano has been an extremely important project because of so much donor support. We worked on the ceiling and the canvases of the story of Esther, all the wonderful works by Veronese, the Veronese frescoes. We also the high altar area with two stories in the life of Saint Sebastian and the high altar. And of course, the facade as well. Here you see an interior picture taken recently, and you can see that the church has made a remarkable change and has really been a project Save Venice is proud of. Another change came about in Save Venice in 2015 when we moved to our current location in Palazzo Contarini Polignac. And this was because of the great David Rosand, who left us his library when he died in 2014. He wanted his personal library to be in Venice and be a resource for Save Venice and also for scholars in Venice and particularly the English-speaking community of scholars. And so we established the Rosand Library and Study Center, and this has also been a wonderful sort of change in Save Venice, giving us more scholarly aspect. Of course, talking about Acqua Alta, I can't not talk about the floods of November 12th, 2019. After so many lectures I've given talking about the flood of 1966 and the traumatic aftermath, it was kind of hard to believe that during my era of working for Save Venice, I too would have to confront the second largest flood in Venice's history. So this historic moment really showed what Save Venice was made of, and we right away got to work, had an immediate response fund helping with the Italian embassy in Washington, and started on raising funds and working immediately. We raised over $700,000, and some of the highlights of the projects were looking back at our past. We worked in the Cadoro Museum on the ground floor, which floods quite often. And you can see how wonderful the ground floor looks. This was taken just a few nights ago during an special evening opening of the museum. We also worked on San Donato, which we are still working now with flood relief and then restoring and doing maintenance on the floor. The Church of the Miracoli, again, even though it's very high, it also flooded. And so we did a lot of rinsing and emergency work, and now we're working on the floor with a conservation school who will be learning new techniques and performing a maintenance and restoration of the Renaissance floor. And then San Sebastiano, of course, where my colleague Leslie Contarini led a group of restorers and volunteers to clean out the debris, to rinse the church. We are now also working on a subfloor for the bell tower and for the second sacristy. So it's nice at Save Venice, we've always been able to take care of our monuments. Something we adopt remains ours forever. But to get more to the topic of this evening, I'd like to talk about our 50th anniversary projects. When we had to decide on what to do to commemorate this 50 years of experience in Venice, it wasn't easy to come up with the right project because we'd already had substantial projects in the past and so many important paintings and locations. And it just with a bit of good timing and looking at many various opportunities, I think we came up with two perfect projects that really sum up Save Venice's dedication and tribute to Venetian culture. We adopted the mosaics on the Church of Santa Maria Assunta, so it's been more than 40 years since the last treatment, and the Italian Synagogue in the ghetto. So I'll start talking about our project in the ghetto. Here you see the entrance of the Ghetto of Venice, the enclosed area which was designated for the Jewish community in 1516. You can see in these illustrations a map of the ghetto and then the extension of the Ghetto Novo and the Ghetto Vecchio, and you can see where it is in the Cannaregio district. This area of Venice was originally an iron foundry, and it already had high walls. And so when the Venetian government decided that they would find a place for the Jewish community to live, it was an ideal spot. This was a forced enclosure, no doubt, but it also gave the Jewish community the possibility to stay in Venice for longer periods of time. They were able to stay for 10 years and then renew this permanently. And so soon Jews from all over Europe came to Venice because it was somewhere where they could stay and develop a life and worship as they pleased. Of course, the Jewish presence in Venice goes much farther back than 1516 with the first enclosures. It starts with a Jewish cemetery, which is founded in 1386 on the Lido, with the first grave that's been found today dating to 1389. Save Venice worked here in 1999 with a few other committees to drain it and restore the tombs, and now it is something that can be visited. But it's very important to show that the Jewish presence goes much farther back than from the ghetto. We also see from paintings from the 1490s, so again, 20 years before the ghetto was founded, that it's very typical in a cityscape in Venice to have foreigners, including Jews. And we see paintings, these ones are all three by Carpaccio, all of them conservation projects of Save Venice. When you see the very elegantly dressed foreigner, or sort of exotic man, it would be a Jew here in Venice with very interesting headwear. The headwear was the sort of the designating point. And so this was just a typical Venetian phenomenon where you'd have Turks, you'd have Germans, you'd have Jews, you'd have Muslims. Everybody was here. It's a very bustling trade city. So, of course, the ghetto, going back to the actual physical space, was a very bustling and busy place to be because you had so many different communities and languages being spoke. The first group of people that came were the Germans, the Ashkenazi, from Germany, Northern Europe. And then at the same time, the Italians came, the Italian Jews who practiced the Italicum rite, coming from Southern Italy and from Rome. Eventually, Levantines were from people that had gone east and then come back to Europe, and also the Ponentines from Spain and Portugal. So you have to imagine this area of Venice with so many different languages, of course, going on, so many different rituals, so many different traditions, everybody living and working and worshiping in an enclosed area. I mean, the Jews could leave during the day. Christians were also allowed in the ghetto. It was just the restrictions came down at night, and certain restrictions about occupations and banking practices. Of course, all these different communities each built their own synagogue because it was sort of natural that you'd want to worship in your own right, in your own language, with your own community. And so this rather whimsical map of showing the cats of the Jewish community shows also the different synagogues. So we have the oldest synagogue is the German synagogue from 1528. You have the Scuola Canton, which is another Ashkenazi synagogue from 1532. Then we have the Scuola Leventina, which was built in the Ghetto Novo, 1541. The Italian Synagogue, 1575, and of course the Spanish Synagogue, the largest synagogue, from 1584. Save Venice, of course, had been active in Jewish heritage projects for many years. We worked on the Scuola Tedesca in the year 2000, also restored books in the archives in 2006, the cemetery I already mentioned, and an interesting project, the Sukkah, in the Canton Synagogue, restored in 2007. Of course, the Festival of Sukkot is coming up, starting tomorrow. It's a festival where you celebrate under the open air. And it was very unusual that in the 19th century, adjacent to the Canton Synagogue, on a top floor, a sukkah tent was built where the roof was actually removed so that the festival could be celebrated under the open sky. Today you can visit it in the Jewish Museum, and you see the picture where it's decorated as the traditional sukkah tradition. So Save Venice got involved once again with working in the ghetto, thanks to a big plan, a master plan launched by the Jewish community to restore the 3 Renaissance synagogues in the Ghetto Novo and to remodel or renovate the Jewish Museum. And so we were interested in the project and very happy to collaborate with the Jewish community. The main part of the project is around the museum. And Save Venice was fortunate to receive a grant from the Jerome Levy Foundation, which is enabling the ground floor of the museum to be renovated, another space, the bookshop moved, an elevator put in, a series of things that will be sort of the welcoming point for the museum. And from there, you'll be able to visit 3 synagogues, the Tedesca, the Canton, and the Italian Synagogue. So Save Venice decided themselves that we, the board of directors, the staff, and our donors, that we would like to adopt the Italian Synagogue. And so this decision was made, and we decided this would be one of our anniversary projects. The Italian Synagogue was always thought to be the poorer of the synagogues, somewhat thought to be less decorated, not very well known, because for many, many years it wasn't open to the public, and then through the museum tour on a very limited basis because of problems with the access. So the idea of adopting the Italian Synagogue was very exciting because we could give something back to Venice and back to Venetian Jewish culture if we could restore the Italian Synagogue and put it back on the museum tour, and also to be able to be used for worship. So I'm going to show you some of the interior of this gola so you can see what it's like. When you walk in, you see the 5 large windows that we saw outside on the facade. Right now, we can't open those windows because the wooden shutters are all broken and sort of dangerously off their hinges. And so one of the first things during our restoration campaign will be to finally be able to open the windows and the shutters and see the actual light that's normally in the space. When you look toward the center, you see the Holy Ark, the Aron in Italian, and on the right you see the entrance to the atrium and the women's gallery. Now the synagogue went through several renovations. It's founded in 1575, but most likely the Italian community was here from the very beginning, from 1516, that they worshipped in another area and maybe in the same building but on a lower floor. And it wasn't until 1575 that they had the funds to actually build a synagogue. Here again, you see the women's gallery that was added in the 17th century with modifications in the early 18th century, and the atrium. The atrium looks out on the canal behind the ghetto. The synagogue is very luminous when we do have the windows all open because it faces the canal on one side and the campo on the other, in the square. And you see the wonderful detail of a very old terrazzo Venetian flooring that's in the atrium. That flooring is in contrast with the flooring in the rest of the synagogue, which was put in the 1970s because the original terrazzo floor underneath was damaged and it was easier just to cover it over. And part of our conservation project now will be to try to recover the original terrazzo floor. So again, you can see the ark with its the doors. This is where the Torah is held, and you see the mother of pearl detailing, and you see the very, very dark wood. This is a very mixed style, and that's something that we'll have to deal with in conservation to determine what era to bring the decoration back to because of so many different decorative attempts. This is the bima, the pulpit, and you can see this is all a wooden structure. And you can see having another fabulous terrazzo floor up on the raised pulpit. This is something I discovered when I was in the synagogue last week. It's a chair, obviously, for the who saying the services, but when you lift the seat up of the chair, there's a little lockbox, a safe, where some of the precious silver would have been kept. So it was an interesting little secret we discovered by lifting up the bench. We also saw the door of the Kohanim, which is, the presider of the blessings of during the services. And this doorway leads to sort of a space underneath the bima. And the bench actually lifts up so that the Kohanim can come out and walk through the worshipers and say his blessings. And right now we can't get the door open from any more than about 8 inches. And so eventually that will be fixed and we'll sort of have a better idea about these different little secrets of the synagogue. One of the most illustrious members of the Italian community was Leon Modena. He was born in Venice, but then his family moved to Ferrara, and then he moved back to Venice as a teenager. He's very well known today for various reasons. He's an author of many, many texts, including The History of the Jewish Rite. It was a book that was actually commissioned by an ambassador, an English ambassador, who was visiting Venice. And it was a way of explaining Judaism to Gentiles. And this book was translated into many different languages. But why we know most about Leon today is his autobiography, which was translated and printed in English in the 1980s, The Autobiography of a 7th Century Venetian Rabbi. It's a very interesting, entertaining read because Leon Modena is such a character. He talks about his 26 occupations, and I've shown you part of the original manuscript where he's listed his 26 occupations, and then I've given you the translation. So he worked from being a teacher to being a composer to be a judge, a matchmaker, teaching arcane remedies and amulets, drawing up contracts, translating, printing, preaching. As you can see from the list, Leon had all sorts of ways to make a living. He was also known for being a gambler, and this created a bit of a problem, which is why he was always scrambling to have money. He's buried in the Jewish cemetery in the Lido, and his gravestone is visible still today. So he's a very special element of the Italian synagogue, maybe the best known personality of the ghetto. So when talking about the condition problems in the synagogue, you see the problems with the infiltration and the plaster. You see this very, very dark wood. So what we've first done is done trial cleaning to take off the layers of paint to see what the color should be. Because this very dark paint is more of a late 19th century addition where a very somber tone was added to space that was supposed to be much more luminous. We see here from the different trials how much lighter the wood is and not the dark, say, Victorian taste, we could call it, of a black wood. And from doing some research, we realized that in 1808, Pierangelo Fossati was in charge of renovating the synagogue. And he was well known for having done in 1789 for the Church of San Rocco a wooden choir structure, which was restored about 15 years ago and brought out and put on display again. It was meant to be a temporary structure, and now it's a set structure within the church. But in looking at that and seeing the wooden structure that is painted to look like faux marble in the gray colors, you can very much see that the synagogue was not supposed to be brown and look like wood, but was supposed to look like marble. And that's visible in the cleaning patch that we opened where you see the gray and white marble. So we'll be taking the synagogue back to closer to that style, removing the heavy brown paint, removing overpaint also on this daisy pattern you see, which is now a blue-gray, but underneath it was actually a beige white. So research is still being done to understand the various phases of renovations in the synagogue, to understand the decoration and what it should be, but we are making progress. One of the interesting things about learning about the Italian synagogue is understanding the people who were part of it. This is a ledger from 1792 that we were looking at last week during a visit that lists different members of the synagogue and coming to different events and paying them their dues. There's also a very rich library and archives in the ghetto, and certainly there'll be more documents to be found to understand more of the decoration of the synagogue. To understand the Jewish community, you can see this picture of a Jewish wedding in Venice, 1780. It's a community that's very much assimilated at this point. Just like any other Venetian event, Venetian clothing, they've sort of gotten over by the 18th century any of the distinction as much as being foreigners. This is very much Venetians, although they do still retain the various synagogues and the Sephardic, Ashkenazi, and Italicum rites. And so with the fall of the Venetian Republic in 1797, that led to the opening of the ghetto. So in July of 1797, the gates were removed and the Jewish community was free to move out of the ghetto to live wherever they want, and the restrictions were all lifted. And so in the 19th century, many illustrious Jews were part of the Venetian movement for the resistance against the Austrians. Many people moved out. One of the first families bought Cadoro, actually, and lived there for many years. And so the community is completely part of the Venetian way of life. The ghetto today has less than 500 enrolled members. So it's a very small community responsible for a very large artistic patrimony. Worship takes place in the Spanish synagogue, which is very large and cool in the summer, and in the Levantine synagogue during the winter because of the heating system. Of course, the community has had its tragedies, with 254 Jews deported and only 8 returned. But it's a very resilient community. And certainly after the war, people were determined to stay in Venice. The museum was founded in 1955, and there was an even more of a desire to preserve Venetian Jewish heritage. The Jewish community is part of a union of Jewish communities all over Italy, and they have a president and a council. And they make all the decisions and take care of the artistic patrimony and any other belongings of the community. When you do visit the ghetto, you also notice the Chabad Lubavitch group, which have been in the ghetto since the 1990s. It's a group of New Yorkers, Orthodox organization, and they have a separate worship from the Venetian Jews. That's a very friendly but separate relationship with the Jewish community. They're sort of reviving the Jewish spirit, but it's a very different movement from the Venetian Jewish community and the traditional Venetian with the museums and the synagogues, but a very important part of the life of the ghetto, sort of history repeating itself as another group of foreigners have come to live in the ghetto. So at this point, we're very grateful to the ghetto sponsors, the sponsors of the Italian Synagogue. We continue to fundraise for the project, and work should be kicking off in a couple weeks because we're all set to start on the ground floor of the museum and also the Italian Synagogue. So over the upcoming year and a half, 2 years, we'll be able to let you know what else we discover and what other wonderful things we learn about the Italian community. Our second project for the ghetto, for the anniversary, is the Church of Santa Maria Assunta on Torcello. Torcello is an island out in the Venetian lagoon. It takes about 40 minutes on the Vaporello to get there. It's always had a special mystique with Americans, particularly Ernest Hemingway, who in 1948, in November, spent a month there while he was working on his novel Across the River and in the Trees. He spent his days writing and duck hunting. And as you see, duck hunting, just in the Carpaccio painting, it was a common activity in the lagoon. Hemingway had a very special feeling for Venice. He felt like he'd always lived there. And he said he could go out to Torcello by boat in a fog. He would know how to get there. So this very deep-rooting feeling that Torcello can give one is perhaps why, for our anniversary, we wanted to continue working there. You see, Torcello gives you a sense of what the lagoon was like back in the time when Torcello and the lands were first being settled, coming out of the mainland and developing out of a swamp. You can see Torcello was a thriving community with its own canals, with the palaces. There were 7 monasteries and convents. It was a very, very busy, very important center, also of commerce early on. It went into decline because of malaria. It became a very difficult place to live, and Venice sort of overtook Torcello, sort of taking away its independence, and eventually by the 1700s it was mostly known for its ecclesiastic life, but no longer was a center in any other way. As I'd mentioned before, we worked in Torcello in the 1970s, And so now going back to it, we continue to work. Before we adopted for the anniversary project, we had been working there in 2002 on doing maintenance on the mosaics of the Last Judgment, and also have an ongoing project aside from our project for the mosaics that's in memory of John Julius Norwich, which is the iconostasy and the panel paintings there. And it was thanks to this project that actually led us to the project of working on it for the anniversary of the two apses and the mosaics, basically because of a handful of mortar. I was on a site visit in Torcello last year to see the progress of the iconostasy project. And I was talking to an architect there who was working on the facade for another commission from the Catholic Diocese. And he wanted to show me the state of the apse, the exterior of the church. And so we went around the back and he showed me the crumbling brickwork and handed me pieces of brick. And I immediately came back to the office, called Christopher Apostle and said, we've got to do something about Torcello. And so from there, we decided that this could be a project for us, that we needed to restore the walls, we needed to restore the mosaics, and that this was another anniversary project. The reason we care so much about the walls of the Torcello is that obviously they support the mosaics. You can see you have the brick wall, and then your undercoat, and then the tessera of the mosaics are applied. So if there's any decohesion between the marble brick and the plaster and the pieces of mosaic, you end up losing the decorative elements. And so it's very important that the walls are stable to hold up the church, but also to be able to support the decorative system. So our project for our anniversary involves the two apses, the center apse and the iconicon apse, the exterior and the interior. It's a very busy project with many, many elements, and I'll quickly run through to let you know what we're doing in what area, sort of step by step. Obviously, our fascination with the brickwork on the wall continues, so you can see how enthralled our board members and visitors were in February looking at the various types of brick and what we're working on. We have Roman bricks, we have bricks that are recycled from Altino, was a Roman settlement on the mainland. We have Altinelle, which are bricks from the 13th century, 12th and 13th century. We have some modern bricks from a restoration in 1930. All of this creating the general problem with the brickwork on the back of the church. And you can see the decay. So the work to reinforce the walls has to do with replacing some of the mortar. You don't want to replace the bricks unless you absolutely have to. So we replace the mortar. We also inject hydraulic lime. And when necessary, also there's fiberglass rods that are placed into the walls to support the brickwork. On the inside, the first part of the project we started working on was in last fall, and when it's the Diaconicon apse with the Christ Pantocrator mosaic. And here you see our work site, which we have a photograph of the mosaic so the visitors in the church can see it, and our sign for Save Venice and our donor signs. Of course, working on the mosaics, we brought in the master mosaic restorer, Giovanni Cucco, who you might remember from the picture you saw earlier from 1978, because it was Giovanni that was working there at that time, and he knows every inch of these mosaics like nobody else. And so Giovanni starts his condition report of the mosaics, listening to find where the mosaics have detached from the wall, and also cleaning the surface, and making decisions about what needs to be done and where, usually using little stickers to map out the damage, and also putting together graphs, all done by hand, showing the various degree of decay when they're missing pieces, and where he needs to do injections of resins to keep the mosaic pieces attached to the wall. You see the wonderful detail of the face of the Pantocrator Christ, which has been cleaned, and the restoration has been completed on this one. Just to give you an idea of the wonderful mosaics, we have the angel Gabriel and the angel Michael. Here's one of the angels holding up the Lamb of God with Giovanni Cucco's stickers on him, showing where, before he started work, where he would be injecting the resins. Here's an interesting example of two different faces. These are part of the four bishops that are at the bottom level. They have Gregory, Martin, Ambrose, and Augustine. Traditionally, it would be the four doctors of the church, but Martin was more of a local cult, and so Martin was put into this group. And you see a difference between the mosaic on your left and the mosaic on your right. The one on the left is much looser. You see the pieces of tessera are bigger. This was heavily reworked in the 19th century, as opposed to the figure on the right, which is St. Martin with his rosy cheeks. He, with a much tighter sort of bind of the mosaic, is the 11th century. So you can sort of see the difference in how it's worked. The details and the color of these mosaics are absolutely incredible, just to give you some eye candy to see what we're dealing with of the marble and glass pieces. And the colors, the blues, the greens. Here you see the Lamb of God, and you see a visit with the Ministry of Culture and the architects looking at the mosaics in the vault. And we started to worry about this vault because whether or not it was structurally sound. And so the architect in charge of the project decided that he needed to go up on the roof and look down at the vault from within the roof tiles. So some of the roof tiles were removed so they could see the status of the vault. And what we did see was some color and some letters, which made us realize immediately that there were frescoes. So the project changes immediately. The roof is opened, and we start studying and removing the debris to see if there are more frescoes. Now, this is all this area above the vault right here, so it's not visible. And you can see in the exterior view where we have our covering in the back of the church. And lo and behold, there were frescoes, extensive frescoes dating from the 9th century. So here we have some decoration, we have the Virgin Mary, and we have St. Martin, who seems to be very prominent in the church. As we saw, we have him strangely so in the mosaics. And we were able to date these frescoes from the nature of the writing. It says St. Martin, and a scholar, specialist in letters from this time period confirmed that this is definitely 9th century. So why this is so important is it shows there was a very elaborate decorative cycle in the Church of Torcello before the mosaics. So here for Save Venice, we were all into this project for the mosaics, and we found something even earlier than the mosaics. It's been a very exciting discovery, getting a lot of publicity. In July, we had a press conference with the Patriarch of Venice, the highest ecclesiastic figure, and the archaeologists and the people working on the project. Because this was something of a surprise, showing that Venice was not only looking toward the east, toward Byzantium, but actually previously had more of a Carolingian influence looking toward the west. And the shift to the Byzantine era came in the 11th century with the redecorating of Basilica San Marco and also with the mosaics in Torcello. Discoveries continued in the Diacon Chapel, which we actually dismantled an altar and found the foundations of the 9th century floor. We also found Roman carvings that had been recycled. On one side, we had Baroque angels carved, and on the back side, we could still see the Roman pieces of marble. Continued also working in the crypt area behind the central apse. You can see the workmen there working to take off plaster, and you can see the center altar in the crypt. Of course, we decided to dismantle the crypt altar, and the archaeologists came in and did a dig, and we found more frescoes. This happened in August, so after we'd already made the announcement about the frescoes on the roof. These are very fragmentary, seem to be figures of bishops, very colorful, and not as easy to preserve because they're on the ground level, and so it's still not clear what the best way to take care of these and if we can keep them visible. We also found many fragments of frescoes when they dug out all the debris within this altar. So we found out that the entire crypt would have been frescoed in beautiful blues and reds and greens. And it sort of would have been a route for people to come visit the holy relics of the church. Continuing in the church, we're working now on the sort of the choir or the synthrenon, which is the brick choir, which would have been covered with wood, but now is exposed brick. And above that, there are frescoes, date uncertain, probably 11th century possibly, underneath marble sheeting. This was a discovery from the 1930s in the conservation. But we're about to, in the next couple of weeks, take off the rest of the marble sheeting because we have to desalinate it and protect it. And we'll see if there are more frescoes. You can see the deteriorating brick of this area. These are 1930s brick who don't stand up as well as the Roman bricks, and we'll be replacing and repairing here as best we can. But the really exciting part is starting soon with the restoration of the central apse. And just the beginning of this week, the scaffolding, partial scaffolding is set up so that our master mosaic conservator, Giovanni Cucco, can come and start his condition reports. And then the restoration will begin. You can see the whole complex here. We have the Madonna di Ghitria, we have the apostles beneath, and the Annunciation scene. And this is a church dedicated to Mary, the Assumption of Mary. So the Marian presence is very strong here, having her in the center, and then also the Annunciation scene above. You can see this is one of the most remarkable works in Venice. The dating is uncertain, I think probably late 11th century, in a style very close to Constantinople. And we're very curious to see the condition of this. From the photo, you can see possibly some of the damage. It's a very vast, very large area to work with. And if we can start in the next couple weeks, then we'll be able to go through the winter and spring and into the summer with this work. Seeing the whole complex, there are various elements, the writing, the gold background, the apostles. The apostles are also very interesting. And again, the damage seems to be evident, some missing tessera. And the exterior wall will be worked on at the same time, because we can't touch the outer wall without being sure that the mosaics are in place as well. Here are a few details of the apostles. We're now in the process with the scaffolding up to be able to take proper photographs, and now we're still having to deal with things from the ground. But they're very beautiful figures, very interesting work, and we're very much looking forward to see what the restoration of the central apse brings to us. There's also a wonderful figure of Eleodorus, a saint, very prominent figure on Torcello. And that's another piece that will be restored and to its glory. So we're very thankful to the donors of our Torcello program and the anniversary campaign. And this again is a campaign that still continues, and we'll be hoping to have more donations and more adoptions, but none of this would be possible without the people that are already helping to support us today. So for our 50th anniversary projects, I think you get a sense of how enthusiastic I am about these two projects, about the discoveries and the new experience that Save Venice is having, sort of looking back on places we've worked before, but finding out new things. And this is very important for Save Venice, that it's also that we're making new discoveries, that we're advancing art history, we're advancing archaeology, we're advancing this understanding of Venice's culture and its artistic patrimony. We're saving it physically, but we're also saving it because we're creating more interest. People are going to want to know about Venice because of all the things that we've helped to discover. So just a little call out to something coming up in the future. We're having a virtual showcase of our projects that will be the end of October. And here you see some of the filming behind the scenes in Torcello. Even better, here you see Giovanni Cucco being interviewed. And then you see one of our Venetian board members, Alberto Nardi. And so this sort of wraps up my summary of all of Save Venice through the years and our anniversary projects.
I want to thank all of our patrons, our sponsors, our donors for the 50th anniversary projects, for all of our projects. If any of you have more questions, keep sending them in. We'll try to answer them as best we can in a timely fashion. If you want to get more involved, for those of you who aren't already involved, so many friendly names I see popping up on the screen. But for those of you maybe you haven't gotten involved, there's many ways. If you like educational projects, we have a great team in the ERC, the Educational Resources Committee, that's coming up with amazing publications about Carpaccio and all sorts of things. We're raising money, of course, for our 50th anniversary, and we love donors to that to help us celebrate 50 years and 50 years going strong for the next 50 years. And of course, the immediate response fund is something that we are hoping that those of you who are thinking about environmental issues can also think about that as a way to help preserve and save Venice. So for me, project director here in New York, Christopher Apostle, for Melissa, thank you so much. Always amazing, really informative, and we will see you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.